Welcome to another episode of In Your Business. Today we're going to learn from an entrepreneur who may or may not think of himself as an entrepreneur, but I think he's an entrepreneur in every way. He's a professional artist. And as we learn his story, it's quite an adventure that he's taken to be where he's at, but where he's at is a great place. And I think he enjoys entrepreneurship, and I think you're going to enjoy this interview with Justin Venning. Justin, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So Justin, what I'd like to do on the show is we're going to get to know you as an entrepreneur. We're going to come back around to the business, if you will.
Okay, yeah.
And your business is unique from a standpoint. It's not a restaurant. It's not a factory. It's not a distribution center. It is art.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be interesting to learn about that and learn about what you do. So if we may, let's start as you just as a little guy.
Yeah.
So, what were you thinking when you were a little guy? What do you want to be?
Well, I think I wanted to be a farmer. So I grew up on a farm in northern Indiana, and that's really all I knew as a kid was just tractors and fields and corn and soybeans, and that's where I was headed.
So your parents were farmers?
Yeah,
and,
my dad was a farmer. My grandpa, my great grandpa. So I come from a long line of farmers, and so when I was in high school, it was it was the mid '90s, and I don't know if I was rebelling or what, but I decided I didn't really want to be a farmer. And if I got to choose what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to choose something fun. And that's when I decided to go to Purdue University to be an art teacher. Okay. And so I went to Purdue undergrad to study art and to ultimately graduate and become an art teacher.
Okay. But before we leave the farm,
sure,
I have to ask, how old were you when you first jumped on that first tractor?
I mean, as a kid, not driving, I have memories going back, to the earliest memories I have being on a tractor riding around the fields. I think I was probably 13 or 14 the first time I started driving a tractor. Okay. And that was probably right around the first time I started driving a car, too, in a truck around the farm. Okay. It was probably right around 13 or 14.
How many acres?
500 acres.
Okay.
So,
it's a pretty good sized farm, I think.
It seemed like a lot. Now that's really small.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know that industry very well,
yeah.
But it sounds like a lot to me.
Yeah, as a kid, it seemed like a lot. You were driving tractors all over everywhere all the time, but now, 500, those size farms barely exist now.
Okay, all right. So we're going to transition. You said you went to Purdue.
Yep.
You studied to be an art teacher.
Yep.
Why teacher?
So, honestly, there's that saying, those who can't teach, or whatever that saying is, when I look back at my high school experience, I loved art. But the thing is I would have never considered myself, really skilled at it or really talented. When I look back and think about who the best drawers and painters were in my school, I wouldn't have counted myself amongst them. But I knew I had a passion for it. I knew I really enjoyed it. And so that's why I decided teaching.
So you weren't sure you could actually do the art, but you thought you could teach the art.
Yeah, well, and I don't know if I could do it at the level necessary to sustain a livelihood, as a professional. So that's why I decided to go teach. So
you earned your degree, you became a teacher.
Yep.
So you left Purdue as a graduate, and where did you start teaching?
So I left Purdue in 2004, and my first job was in Pendleton, Indiana. Okay. And I was an elementary art teacher teaching K through 6. And I had right around 750 to 800 students. It was a decent-sized elementary school.
That's a lot, actually.
Yeah. It took years to get to know all their names.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So as an art teacher, then you were responsible. You just had probably each kid for 30 minutes a day or something?
I think the younger ones were 40, and the older kids were 50 minutes a day, once a week.
So you were turning students quite quickly.
Yeah. And in a way, I kind of liked that. It always made your days interesting because I felt like there was sort of this cycle of ups and downs and highs and lows, and really fun classes and sometimes really challenging classes.
Okay. So how long did you teach?
So I was a teacher for 3 years.
Okay. Always at the same school?
Yep. I was at the same school.
So you went to college, you became a teacher, went right into the classroom.
Yep.
3 years. What happened?
So at that point, Indiana, the education system, there was sort of all this buzz about, if you become too expensive as a teacher with too much tenure, it becomes more and more difficult to move. So I wasn't sure if Pendleton was the long-term place for me. So I was going into that third year as sort of a pivotal year if I was going to either move school districts, move to a different part of the state, move in any sort of capacity. I felt like that third year was really a year to make decisions. And going into the fall of that year, my little brother was graduating undergrad from Valparaiso University, and he decided he was going to go to law school. And I thought that seemed like a very good idea. And so we applied to 10 different schools, maybe 11, all over the Midwest. And we got into 2 schools that were the same. And one of the schools was Valparaiso, which was about 60 miles from our family farm. And so that's where we went. And
So the two of you started law school together.
Yep. So I went to law school with my little brother.
So the two of you went all the way through. You graduated law school.
Yep. We both passed the bar, and that morning is still one of the most clear, memorable mornings because our fear was that one of us wouldn't pass. And the life plan at that point, we had already signed a year lease in downtown Warsaw, about a half block from the courthouse. We were going to open up a law firm together. And I'm going to fast forward a moment, but the predictability of my art sales at that point, month over month, could sustain our business overhead. Okay. And so the plan in the short term, once we graduated, was I was going to continue to paint, and my brother was going to build out the law practice. And so I guess our fear was, the worst hypothetical was if he failed and I passed, because that was like the exact inverse of our plan.
Right.
And but we both passed, and I remember. I think the results went live at like 7 or 8 a.m. It was, early morning. And all I remember saying hearing is my brother goes, there's 2 names, meaning there's 2 Vinings, which
right.
we both passed. And then we went out to breakfast that morning with my grandparents and proceeded to celebrate all day.
Wow, that's a great story.
Yeah.
So what happened after that, though?
So, well, right around that same time, I think the bar results come out October or November. You take it in June or July, and so there's this 3-month period where you're just kind of in limbo land. You don't know if you're going to be a lawyer. You don't know. And the long short of it, I had the CEO of a corporate headhunting firm here in Indianapolis call me up out of the blue. I had known him socially for years, and he asked me to interview for a job at his firm. And, I actually wasn't really that interested. My brother and I had a pretty clear plan for life at that point. But, I don't know if I'm ashamed to say it, but sometimes money talks, and I am, as we kind of discussed earlier, I am somewhat money motivated. I want to go through life comfortably. So it was interesting. The money opened up my ears to that conversation. I went down, interviewed, and ended up accepting that job. And so about 6 months in, what I really, really, really liked about corporate headhunting was it's a lot like chess. I'm an avid chess player. I play chess every day and have since I was a little kid. And corporate headhunting, I was recruiting specifically sales roles and getting director level, vice president level salespeople on the phone and selling them. It's a really hard sell. So you really have to understand the value you're selling. And I loved it. And so I ended up talking the firm into hiring my brother. And so about 6 months after that, they brought in my brother. And about a month later, I kind of came to this realization, although I loved it, at that point I'd built an online following of about 25,000 through selling art. And I was not painting at all, not selling at all, not cultivating my art business at all. I just didn't have time to do it. And I was kind of coming to this realization, if I, wanted to take that leap and take the risk and honestly, be poor, I would probably, the longer you lean on a decent salary, the harder it is to probably quit that lifestyle and become poor again. So I felt like, it was then or never. And so probably about 4 weeks after my brother came in, I ended up quitting that. That was summer 2011 to pursue art full time. And I've been doing it for 8 years since.
So for 8 years, you have been a professional artist.
Yep.
You've not practiced law.
Not practice law for money.
Okay.
So I've maintained an active license. I do all my continuing legal education. But my brother is now, he's been a solo practitioner for 5.5 years in
Okay.
Indianapolis now. And so even on Monday this week, I ended up not going to court, but he had a couple hearings at the same time. And so he ended up being able to cover both of them. But every once in a while, it's almost kind of like a substitute teacher, but out of brotherly love. And so I'll cover a hearing or two for him when he's in a super pinch.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
but your day job, what
Yeah.
you're doing
Yeah.
is professional art.
Yeah, it
Okay.
is. So I make and sell paintings. And
So it's interesting though, because that is so entrepreneurial. I mean, you went from being a teacher to being an attorney to being a professional artist. That's how entrepreneurs work.
Yeah.
We change it up.
yeah.
And now I really want to talk about the art.
Sure.
Because you've made a true business out of art.
I have. And I feel like my development in learning how to do that business has kind of been twofold. And what I mean by that is in law school, one of my buddies had just gotten his MBA. And so he kind of taught me the instincts of running a business and not necessarily, like building a brand. What is a brand? Do I need a logo? What does it look like? And I mean, I remember we actually had a rock climbing wall in a garage in Valparaiso, Indiana. That was part of our exercise for staying fit, and there was an 8-foot by 8-foot vertical wall in that, and we did all like the Justin Vining branding exercises on that wall. Do I need a logo? What do I stand for? What? It was a really fascinating time, and so I learned a lot about even at that point Facebook advertising. How spending money to make money, and so I learned kind of all that stuff from the people around me. But I would say when I became a corporate headhunter, I learned the metrics and the data that moves business forward. And that was when I quit that firm. They had an Excel document. Internally, we called it a hot sheet. And the hot sheet was essentially the pipeline of business. Past sales performance, current business in the pipeline, and you're able to predict, future performance.
Okay.
And when I quit that job, I took their hot sheet and I converted it to my business. And so for 8 years now, I've driven a metric-driven business. And so, I have 7 full years of sales data, and I know everything that's in my pipeline, how many days it takes me to sell a painting, my average price per square inch, when I sell in 0 days versus when I sell in 30 days versus when I sell in 90 days versus when I sell in 180 days. And based upon all that data, I can somewhat predict what my revenue will be within the next 90 days. But anyway, so I learned the math behind it all. So in law school, I think I learned, profitability from not necessarily understanding the data, but just like, oh yeah, this is how we make money. Whereas now I really understand the data behind it all.
And having the data work for you.
Yeah, and having the data work for you. Because then it becomes, once you understand the data with some level of predictability, you can almost reverse engineer success. Mm-hmm. And so the way that I've been able to grow my business 12% year over year for the last 4 years is just by understanding the math and then just setting goals to get 12% more for this year. And so right now I'm right on pace for that growth. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not trying to set any sort of crazy records through growth, but one of the things that I've really, really valued, because art can be somewhat of an unpredictable business, I've really tried to make it and build it in a way that's sustainable, comfortable, and predictable. So, not trying to grow too big for my britches too quickly.
Okay.
And the way that I've done that is it would have been 4 years ago. I put some paintings in a very, very prominent gallery in Indianapolis. And what I learned is we didn't sell hardly any paintings at all. Okay. I think we actually sold one. And I had the front window display for almost a year. And what I learned was there was a disconnect between my prices and the paintings. And all my previous success I was able to close that gap through sales and talking. So if I was selling you, I'm telling you my story, I'm telling you about all my performance, I was able to build enough trust within that conversation to sell. But what I learned is without that sort of gap in the middle, there certainly was a disconnect between the price of my work and what they were seeing.
Sure.
And so that actually, it really, really, really bothered me. And so I spent about the next 12 months experimenting with pricing, figuring out where do people give me money repeatedly without me selling in the middle. And that's where I've stayed for years. And that's why, I really sell so much. So I've priced it at a point where, people don't have to know anything about me to buy my work. They don't have to know, the successes I've had and, all the cool things I've gotten to do. They can just, they can buy it and love it for what it is. And to me, that's really important.
So let's talk about your day, because I know I visited one day with you and I enjoyed it. Okay. Yeah. So what does a normal day look like for you?
Well, outside of what I consider show season, I have a pretty organic day, and a lot depends on, I don't just make art, I have to do everything else that comes along with it. The website building, the PR, the networking, the TV appearances, the radio appearances, building the relationships to gain access to press and media, and all of that stuff takes, I would say, a very significant amount of time. Even updating my hop sheet once a week takes 2 to 3 hours just to make sure I'm capturing all the data and learning from it. But so a typical day, hypothetically, in the summer, it can range. Like yesterday, I painted for probably about 8 hours. I started painting probably around 8:30, and I was done painting, maybe, actually I was at 4:30. So I don't know if that's 8 hours or 9 hours. But today, I'll be lucky if I touch a paintbrush today. And so the ebbs and flow of my day-to-day is a little bit more organic. In show season, I do 2-a-days. And so my show season, winter is usually, historically, for most artists, a tough sales cycle. And I've been lucky enough to stumble into, I think, a system that works really well. So I do my big annual gallery exhibit every year in March now. And what that does is it gives me, when sales are naturally, historically slow, I'm not actively selling anymore. I'm building inventory. So from January 1st, it's actually usually probably January 2nd or 3rd, that first Monday after the holiday, I don't go to bed before midnight any night until my show opens. And so I work all day, every day at the studio painting, and I'm building usually a completely separate body of work at the studio, and oftentimes that's in oil. Whereas in the evenings, I come home, I treat it like a 9 to 5. I come home about 5. We usually walk our dogs, or if it's super cold out, we won't walk them. We'll play with the pups and eat dinner, and then after dinner, I paint until midnight. And that's usually in a completely different medium. It's a different space. 3 years ago was the last year I built sort of the evening work at the studio for several different reasons. It's a lot healthier to spend my evenings at home. So we built out a little studio space in our attic. And so during the winter, I'll be at the studio all day, and then I'll be in our attic all evening.
Wow. So when you talk about all the things you have to do, you're an entrepreneur, you have your own business.
Yeah.
So you had to set up as a business, is that correct?
That is, yeah.
So in the classroom, I teach the marketing and the finance, the accounting, all of those things that go into it. You have to do those, right?
Yeah, well, the accounting side I outsource at this point. So it's nice to have that and have someone trusted looking over that stuff. I feel a lot better, sleeping at night that way, having a professional sign off on that stuff. But everything else is, I do everything else, and it's as equally as important as everything else. And what's interesting about entrepreneurship is, in being an artist is I'm not making widgets. So there's a very finite amount with which I can create every year, which means in a weird way, reverse engineering that math, I almost have a limited source of income, because I can't just order more from, the warehouse down the street to produce because I have an order coming in. And so I just have to be super disciplined with my time. You know, I
Sure.
have to really protect it and make sure, and almost to the mindset where, you know, what can I be doing in this moment to move my business forward? And I think one of the things that I've really been thinking about a lot the last 6 months, that's, you know, this idea is setting in more and more and more. In a weird way, if I'm not painting, I'm not making money. And so I'm trying to get as efficient as possible with all of that other stuff. So I'm painting more and more and more and more. And then the other thing I'm trying to do is if I'm going to have a painting day, I try to make it the whole day. So I block out that whole day so I can really be heads down what I'm doing. Whereas a day like today, that's a little bit more organic, you know, I'm going to try to knock out, like I'm going to go over and work from the art museum this afternoon and do some of my website stuff. I had a reporter reach out to me recently, and she said she was looking over my website, and you know, there's a couple big events that I've participated in this year that unfortunately aren't on the front page of my website yet, and
Okay.
that, you know, they need to be there. I just haven't had, you know, in a weird. That's the not fun part of my business, you know, is managing that stuff, but it's important to do, and it's important to stay on top of. And, you know, I try to do the best that I can, but as a, you know, one-person shop, sometimes that's hard.
Well, I think you just answered two of my questions right there, because I always like to ask, what is one of the things that you really enjoy
Yeah.
about being an entrepreneur?
Yeah.
But I think you've already answered that.
Well, I think to go beyond that, I do think my success is somewhat, if I didn't love the challenge of being successful, the challenge of making it, as much as I love making the work. Because I can sit here today and I can tell you I'm as addicted to painting. I love painting, you know, maybe more than I ever have. But at the same time, I can, you know, I love the math behind it all. I love the challenge of, you know, being successful, because in some ways, I think society portrays this career path as an impossibility. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think it can be impossible, but I think the reality that I'm living and my personality type, in some ways, I think it was probably way easier than I ever imagined it could be, because I think, you know, the level of success I'm seeing now, I mean, even financially, you know, I'm still relatively, I mean, I'm not famous. You know, I'm not, you know, it's still, you know, the Indie Star this week, you know, had, you know, the best lists of artists in Indianapolis. I wasn't even on the list, you know, and so, of course, I'm a little bit bummed, but at the same time, that means I just still have lots of work to do. But, you know, I don't know. It's an interesting position to be in, because it's also, you know, at this point, I'm living a comfortable lifestyle.
Sure. But Justin, you're bummed about not being on that list. But here's the great thing, okay?
Yeah.
In my career, I waited a long time to get on those lists. And once you get there, it's an achievement.
Right.
Enjoy the work.
Yeah,
enjoy
no,
the time until you get on
yeah,
that list,
right,
okay?
yeah.
But at the same time, enjoy the experiences. Let's talk about that experience.
Yeah.
Come on. What is one of those greatest experiences you get every May?
Oh, well,
The last 2 years, anyway.
Well, I'm fortunate enough, I get to paint live at the Indianapolis 500 from a private press box. And so it took about 18 months of, you know, building trust with the organization and, you know, jumping through the proper hoops, even from a legal intellectual property standpoint, to get the permission to be out there to do that. And that is, I mean, I honestly, admittedly, I really wasn't a race fan beforehand. I had never been to the Indy 500. I didn't really get what it was all about. Now that I've done it, I mean, it's one of my favorite days all year. You know, the race culture in Indianapolis is contagious, and it's surprising to me. And to be able to experience all the tradition of that day, from an air-conditioned press box across from the pagoda, and then paint it. I mean, it's a cool spot to be in.
Yeah, but what's interesting is you're able to take your talent as an artist everywhere you go.
Yeah.
So every place you go is an experience.
Yeah. Well, I feel lucky to have built the skill to be able to do that. And, you know, 3 years ago, I wasn't like that. I was pretty much just a studio painter. But the last 3 years, I've really, you know, been developing my skill as someone who paints on location. And that has become one of the most fun, you know, it's taken me places I never would have guessed I would go as an artist. I mean, private press box of the 500, painting live during Tamika Catching's jersey retirement in Baker's Life Arena. I mean, these type of experiences are if I couldn't paint on location, and even last Friday night I was at Baker's Life again painting at a Fever game, and to be right in the thick of everything, I was courtside with my easel painting. I mean, how cool is that?
At the same time, you're in Richmond, Indiana, painting as well, and I have a piece of your work from a place called Rail Street that I didn't know existed until you came and painted it.
Yeah, and I think that's the other cool thing about painting on location. Oftentimes, you go to new places, and I have no agenda. I don't even know what's there, and you're walking around, you're just trying to find something that captures you, something, whether it's the light or it's the composition or it's, like that. I haven't really painted a lot of railroad scenes, and I know Richmond, the railroad has been a big part of its history, and it's still the depot area of town is really important and significant, and to go down there and explore a little bit and find a scene I wanted to paint was, it was cool.
It's awesome. Justin, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, man.
Appreciate your time.
Yeah.
So, this concludes another episode of In Your Business. Today we met with an entrepreneur who's really taken entrepreneurship in a different direction, and he understands how to put business and art together. And I've watched him work, I've looked at his art, I've talked to people who've enjoyed his art. It's making a big difference in people's lives. And the reason he's a successful artist is because he also understands the business side of it. He has become a professional business leader, a professional artist, professional in all ways. He's money driven, but he's not really, because I've been around him enough to know that he is also a huge contributor. And he says he's money driven, but that's only a measurement of how he values the work and the impact he's making. It's not because he wants to be rich with money, he wants to be rich with experience. Thank you again for watching In Your Business.